My dear writers, I wish we met in better circumstances, but we need to talk. One Piece has a problem. Well, One Piece actually has like a baker's dozen problems, but in 2024, One Piece is a shell of the story I fell in love with as a child. As we're starting to turn the page to the final chapter of the world's most popular series, long-term fans are definitely feeling a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, it's not like One Piece is going to get canceled or they're not going to renew the next season of the live action, but through a combination of Luffy's fruit reveal and the Flanderization of almost every character that we love, One Piece has become something that's almost unrecognizable. And it's a growing sentiment among fans. One Piece is just no longer the story we fell in love with. And the show changing isn't necessarily a bad thing, but for fans like myself who've been watching for almost 2 decades, it just doesn't feel like home anymore. A lot of the reveals we've gotten from the past few arcs have changed the show, and not just like the tone or the pace, although those things have definitely changed, but kind of the very nature, like the fabric of what it was that I loved so much about One Piece. I know that this is the obvious complaint, but let's address the Zunisha in the room. Luffy's fruit. I mean, Nika literally changes the nature of this entire story. And I know that's like what Oda was trying to do with it. That's the whole kind of plot element, that the penultimate fight that we're going to is this kind of large-scale, mythical, deity-level conflict that's been raging on for 800 years. And not to say that that's completely unexpected. I mean, One Piece has always had this backdrop of Luffy being the chosen one. It's just kind of like the degree of it. Like, I don't hate Nika or the Sun God thing because it makes Luffy the chosen one. Anyone who's seen the show since episode 1 should know that Luffy's always kind of been the chosen one. I mean, he's the son of the most dangerous man in the world. He's a D. He wears Roger's hat. He was like specially selected by a Yonko who seems to be the most powerful person in the world. The chosen one thing's kind of always been there. But when you go and make the protagonist, who's always been this like yuppie, try-hard upstart, and make them a literal god, it changes the nature of what we're watching and why it's so good. Because there's a difference between him being the chosen one, who is just kind of the child of coincidence, versus being a literal reincarnation of someone from 800 years ago who's prophesized and whose story is foretold. I mean, it does give this feeling that what we're watching now, the story of One Piece, is something that was inevitable to some degree, that there wasn't really anything that could have changed that this was going to happen one way or another. Like, the formula of how arcs went doesn't really apply anymore. Luffy's whole thing was that he defied reality. He defied expectation. From the first time he was getting absolutely murked by Crocodile and finding a way, thank you Robin, to come back and finish that fight, to really what he ends up doing up until the Nika reveal in Wano, which is just relentless, coming back, going at it. Like, now we're transitioning to a completely different format where the only thing nerfing him is his stamina, not his actual ability to keep up. We saw in One Piece that the only way to beat villains that were up here was to go from their power level, no matter who it was on the crew, but you know, this is something you saw with Luffy a lot, where their power level was, like in that battle, they needed to scale up. And I think the worry is that with the Sun God fruit reveal, that what we're going to be looking at is a series of like stalling so that Luffy can regain his stamina to get back in the fight. And the villains are really just going to be reacting to his fruit and his power level. Surely there will be battles where Luffy's going up against somebody who's as powerful as him. But right now, where we're sitting kind of at the tail end of the Egghead arc, it feels like this is a completely different series than the one that we started watching. It kind of just feels like a classic modern shonen anime. And again, it's not bad. Like, if you enjoy One Piece and the direction that it's going, there is nothing wrong with that. There's definitely an audience for it. I'm not saying it's poorly written either. It's just a different series than the one that we came to love and expect. The series that I fell in love with these past decades is one about a vast world with insane power levels and a kid who consistently punched above his weight because of his tenacity and his ideals. There was something really magical about him just destroying everyone with this crappy fruit that everybody discounted. And now we come to find out it's a god fruit. And it was the whole time. I do see that he had to unlock it with the awakening, But at the end of the day, it was not the rubber fruit that we loved, and that was a big part of his charm. And let's not even get started on what this could mean for potential plot holes. Like, is he actually made of rubber? How did he beat Enel if he's not? I don't know. Oda, get in the comments. But honestly, for me, this wasn't really a huge deal breaker. Yeah, it's not the story that I fell in love with, but it's bearable. Luffy was always kind of the chosen one, and now that we're just adding more layers of that based on the lore, fine, I can tolerate that. But there is one massive shift that's almost gotten me to give this series up entirely. I won't, because out of spite, I just want to see what happens. I mean, I've been waiting for these lore drops for 20 years, and Oda doesn't seem like he's going to give them anytime soon. But what I find unforgivable is the sidelining and Flanderization of almost all the characters in the series. So much of what makes One Piece good is the ensemble cast approach to how the story operates. I know Luffy is our protagonist, but what we've come to expect is an ensemble protagonist. Yes, Luffy is the main one, but he has a crew, and each one of those members of the crew are introduced in extremely interesting ways, have great backstories, and until recently have added a lot to the story structure pretty much every point along the way. There are arcs where certain characters play a bigger role than others. They kind of switch in and out, but everybody really has their time to shine. And it's not always the Straw Hats. There are always other characters in other arcs, and Law has been a really consistent part of this main ensemble for a while. But there has been this rotating cast of main, secondary, main characters, and it feels like that's completely gone from the story. And I don't know if it'll ever come back. More often than not, these support characters have really significant roles to play in the story. They're often kind of paired with certain arcs, but they have huge importance for driving the narrative beats forward. And on the Straw Hats alone, that ranges from characters like Robin, whose entire backstory is connected to the lore and kind of continuously is this background pushing forward the overarching story of what the hell's going on in this world, to Sanji and Whole Cake Island, where his interpersonal conflict with his family is the central point of that arc. But then we got to Wano. The potential issues that Oda has with giving so much screen time to side characters really came to a head in this arc. The characters we've come to know and love, mainly the Straw Hats, got completely sidelined in favor of giving an insane amount of screen time to groups like the Red Scabbards and Odin. And I do get that Odin has this really important role in the narrative, but I mean, how many chapters of a flashback was that when we can't even get a crumb of anybody else from the crew? And I actually kind of liked those backgrounds. I mean, I liked Odin's backstory so much, but what was the importance? How many of those chapters did we actually need? You couldn't have sacrificed 10 of those chapters to do justice to members that we've been with for over 1,000? And that's the place that I really start struggling with this story. What's the value of this? What is the value of sidelining Zoro's backstory to a footnote when it feels like we've been building towards it at Wano since he was introduced? I mean, it felt like this was the arc where we were going to get this incredible payoff of his childhood and why he was where he was, what the connection with Ryuma was from Thriller Bark. All of this feels like it's building up to something. I mean, the Ryuma thing is nuts. He looks like Zoro. He's undisputed GOAT of swordsmanship. And the connection that you get with him is that his grave was dug up on Wano while Gecko Moria was fighting Kaido, and then we fight him and the soul thing gets transferred. Zoro has the moment of respect with him, and then we go to Wano and nothing happens. Nothing happens with that. I'm not a Zoro fanboy or anything. I mean, I love Zoro. He's badass. He's a great Straw Hat. I don't really get into the fray of the Zoro Sanji thing or anything like that, so don't ask me about it. I don't want to get canceled yet. But man, was that disappointing. That we had a moment. We had a moment, and Oda, you fumbled the bag. Because instead of doing that, instead of giving time to Zoro, who we've been with for 1,000 fucking chapters, here are 9 Red Scabbards, and here's a lot of information about them. I hope you care about it. I don't. I just don't get it. I don't understand it. I didn't write One Piece. It's not my place to say, but I don't get it. And even worse than just sidelining these characters is what I've mentioned a couple times here is the Flanderization of these characters we've known and loved. I mean, has Usopp even done anything the last 200 chapters besides just be scared and react to things? And to me at least, this is the ultimate failure of what looks like the future of One Piece. One of One Piece's greatest strengths has always been its deep roster of really complex and interesting characters. I mean, just look at those like favorite character polls that go out across the world. People care so deeply about so many random characters. Like seriously, we love them. I love these are some of my favorite characters in all of media. And it's because the world is so rich and the characters were presented to us in such a deep, interesting way. Like the debates that people have about different characters, and I'm not just talking the power scaling, although the power scaling is obviously a big piece of it, but like I mentioned earlier, the Zoro, Sanji thing, or like the Yonkos and Admirals, this is what makes the community so good, and it's been a huge part of what's made One Piece so successful. These power scaling and character analysis arguments drive the One Piece fandom forward, always, because we found something that's so compelling in this story, and not just the story, but what is a story but the characters that make it up. And I'm scared. I think that's the big motivation for making this video. I'm kind of terrified about the future of One Piece because I love it so much. And if we're not going to get characters that are still rich and fun to watch and character arcs that are satisfying, then a whole portion of what I love about this series is dead. And I don't want that. I don't want to watch the end of One Piece out of spite because I just need to know what's on Laugh Tale. I want to laugh and sing with the crew along the way, as I have for the last 1,000 chapters. And honestly, I don't envy Oda at all. He's built this behemoth of a story that's become one of the most popular franchises in the world. And it's his job to wrap it up in a way that people find satisfying. There are so many loose ends to tie up, and because of that, I kind of understand why characters have been sidelined or reduced to certain qualities that are easy to reproduce or that he knows are going to land with fans. I don't love it, but I understand it. Ultimately, One Piece might end up being a victim of its own deep and rich world. I mean, when you've built something this sprawling and engaging and deep, how do you wrap it up when it's time to end? Luckily, you and I don't have to answer those questions. We just get to go online and complain about whatever he comes up with. And while honestly, I'm terrified about what the ending is going to be and my potential disappointment about something I've poured hours and hours and hours of my life into, I don't want to spoil the party for everybody else. Like, yes, I'm making a video where I'm just talking about how I'm scared and how One Piece has a problem, but it doesn't mean that One Piece is bad. It doesn't mean that the direction that One Piece is going in is wrong. And what fans like myself, who have been fans for years and years, will find is that this series is just going to get more and more popular. In the last 6 months, I've talked to more new One Piece fans than I have for probably like a decade prior to that. And if people like this, like they like the direction that the series is going in, they're not wrong. I mean, yeah, if people like the Flanderization, I'll argue with them, but if somebody really enjoys the direction of the Nika fruit, or that's something that gets them to engage with it in the first place, that's kind of okay. One Piece has a problem for me, but it won't for so many of the other fans that'll come in now, and honestly, that's just going to get them to experience everything that I've seen. So much of this story has changed my life and my perspective on the world, and instead of arguing about it or telling people, oh, it was better back then and trying to spoil their fun, I'm excited for people to experience what I experienced. I have all my hopes for how One Piece ends, but I've resigned to being along for the ride one way or the other. Maybe I'm just a stowaway on the ship, but regardless of what happens, I'm making it to Laugh Tale with my crew.